Good afternoon. My name is Chloe Murray. I am a research specialist here at the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's quarterly dairy legal webinar. Okay. So today, in addition to our normal review of recent legal developments over the past quarter, we will also be focusing on dairy programs and the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill. So the quarterly dairy legal webinar is a series we started in October 2020. This is the 9th in this series. We do a webinar each quarter that focuses on legal developments over the past quarter. And if you wish to look at any of our past webinars or be aware of the next one, you can find those on our website at aglaw.psu.edu, clicking on the Learn More about the Dairy Webinar series on the homepage. And much of the content that we get for these quarterly dairy webinars comes from the Aglaw Weekly Reviews. The Aglaw Weekly Review is a product we prepare each week that focuses on legal developments or identifies legal developments that have happened over the prior week. And I would like to encourage you to look at our website where you can view the weekly reviews. You also can subscribe so you can receive those on a weekly basis in your inbox. We also have a podcast if you prefer to listen to that content. The podcast provides much of the same content, just in a different format. And they're also accessible on our website, also under the Watch and Listen tab. And I also would like to draw your attention on our dairy and dairy products law virtual resource room that you can find also on the website under research by topic. These resource rooms contain resources on a particular subject, and during the second quarter, we went live with a new resource room dedicated to dairy. You can click on this link from the PowerPoint and go right into it. It is one of the largest resource rooms we have worked on. I highly suggest to keep an eye on this room as we will keep populating it as developments occur. And in this quarterly dairy webinar series, we follow a standard format where we begin by focusing on the recent dairy legal developments for about 15-20 minutes, and then we move on to a specific topic each quarter, and that topic for this webinar being the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill. And we try to leave some time for questions at the end. Now, just some housekeeping matters. First, this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature. We will either address those by typing the response, or we will answer those at the end of the presentation. And if you have any other questions or any technical issues during the webinar, please contact Jackie Schreckler at jks251@psu.edu. And before we start, I would like to thank our partners. This webinar is provided to you using funding that we received from the National Agricultural Law Center in partnership with the National Agricultural Library, which is part of USDA Agricultural Research Service. So for today's webinar, as I said, we will begin by reviewing the past quarter, so that would be July through September 2022. I would be in charge of walking us through those developments from the past quarter, followed by Brook Duer, who is a staff attorney here at the center, for the special focus on today's webinar. Okay, so let's start with dairy developments in Pennsylvania, specifically Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board developments. So a lot has happened since the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has asked the Milk Marketing Board for a hearing last May to discuss whether the overorder premium should be continued and what alternatives may be available. So the board agreed to conduct a public hearing and scheduled it on August 30. So most complaints presenting during the hearing had to do mainly with the current overorder premium calculation, which currently allows wholesalers and retailers to receive a mandated minimum wholesale and retail price, respectively, on higher volumes of milk than the volumes on which they're required to pay the over-order premium, or its equivalent as a pass-through in the mandated producer and minimum wholesale price, and the fact that the over-order premium is only paid to producers deemed to be contributing to in-state fluid milk sales. And you can access through the link here on this PowerPoint all the testimonies that were heard by the board if any of you is interested in reading more about the details of the complaints. So after reviewing the evidence and testimonies, the board ordered on September 21st the continuance of the $1 over-order premium for the period from October 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. However, the most interesting part here is that the board concluding that the over-order premium, I quote, should be examined and modified to best reflect the requirements under Section 801 of the State Milk Marketing Law, which provide that milk producers must be able to cover their cost of production and obtain a reasonable profit on sales. And the fact that the board agreed to amend this over-order premium is quite significant, but it has made clear that such an amendment could only occur through legislative changes. And the board went on to explain that the passage of House Bill 224 into law is key to the success of the amendment. And as a reminder, this House bill would amend the state milk marketing law and milk premiums. The board wrote that it believes the bill would provide additional tools and a framework to begin developing a method to implement Section 801's minimum producer price requirement in a way that would better align minimum retail prices with the amount received by producers and better ensure that all Pennsylvania producers receive a minimum producer price that complies with these requirements. So the bill passed the House unanimously last April and is now awaiting action by the Senate. And you have probably noticed that the current over-order premium has been set up to expire within 90 days rather than usual 180 days. The reason why is because the board believes 90 days should allow enough time for the adoption of the House bill into law. So something quite important is about to happen for the state dairy industry, and we will keep a very close eye on this. If you're interested in learning more about what this means for the Pennsylvania milk marketing reform, I could only recommend listening to our recorded podcast, number 26, where Brook actually raised some interesting points and provided clear explanations on that over-order premium. And you can access the podcast by clicking the link here. Brook, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to note for everyone's sort of thought process, when you start to look forward and you realize that, yes, there are some legislative days left here, and there were some left as of September 21 of 2022, that it's interesting to observe whether, in fact, the intention of the board was to essentially say, well, if you don't act by the end of this legislative session, the overorder premium is going to go away. So if that was an intentional point of leverage to try to get this House Bill 224 passed, then tip of the hat to the board for engaging in a fairly, shall we say, disguised effort or a very veiled effort that has a lot of teeth in it. I don't think anyone in the General Assembly wants the overorder premium to simply go away, but yet that is kind of the game that is now set up to be played out here as we edge towards the end of the year. And I know that we have Doug Everly on the line. And of course, Doug, we do not expect you to in any way, shape, or form respond to this. But in any event, I just think it's an interesting observation that it's a little bit of a game of who's going to blink, perhaps, between the board and the legislature over this particular bill. Because if it doesn't get passed, the board's going to have to do some scrambling if in fact the overorder premium is going to continue on January 1. Now, when the legislature leaves town, perhaps we're going to know, and there'll be enough advance time to put together a hearing by the board, or maybe the intention is to, in fact, let the overorder premium expire if the legislature doesn't act. So in any event, I just wanted to comment on that. Go ahead, Chloe.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, Brook. All right, so let's resume, and now let's talk about the recent USDA's actions. So in this last quarter, the U.S. Department of Agriculture offered different funding opportunities for the dairy industry. In August, the USDA launched the Organic Transition Initiative and announced it would provide $300 million in funding to provide mentoring, direct assistance, and supply chain support for farmers transitioning to organic production, of which $100 million would be devoted to support organic supply chains in specific markets, including dairy markets, to improve organic capacity and infrastructure, market access, and supply organic ingredients. And in September, the USDA also announced $2.8 billion in funding for 70 selected projects, ranging from $5 million to $100 million from the first wave of funding under the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities program. And although USDA initially granted $1 billion for the program, it decided to increase the funding after more than 350 applicants from every state submitted more than 450 projects. And a second group of projects benefiting from USDA funding will be announced later this year. And in this next slide, I have included a list of Pennsylvania leading partners of projects involving dairy commodities, which includes, among others, the Dairy Farmers of America, which was granted $45 million in funding for their project that involves connecting the on-farm greenhouse gas reduction with the low-carbon dairy market opportunity. And also the Pennsylvania State University, which received $25 million to expand climate-smart markets and work directly with dairy producers towards implementing climate-smart agriculture in the state. And you can access the entire list of projects by clicking on this link below. And now at the state level, the Center for Dairy Excellence also announced on August 31st 3 competitive grant opportunities for Pennsylvania dairy farmers, including the Dairy Excellence Program, the aim of which is to improve and increase cow comfort, milk production, and overall operation efficiency. The Technical Assistant Grant Program, which awarded 15 grants of $5,000 each to producers in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey for marketing and branding consultation. And finally, the Dairy Processing Grant Program, whose application remains open until November 1st, 2022 to Pennsylvania dairy processors receiving milk from at least 2 Pennsylvania producers. And the program will match recipient funds up to $10,000 for processing expansions or improvements. And on another note, the National Dairy Farmers Assuring Responsible Management Program, also known as the FARM program, invited dairy industry stakeholders to comment on the FARM program's proposed Animal Care version 5 standards. So the FARM program provides standards and accountability measures in animal care and dairy product production. The Farm Animal Care Task Force and National Milk Producers Federation are responsible for updating those standards every 3 years. and the revised standards should become effective from July 1st, 2024 to June 30, 2027. And the comment period closes on October 28th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And to finish, and on the topic of antitrust, on July 29, 2022, SRJF Incorporated, which is a New York-based raw milk producer, filed before the Federal District Court in Vermont a class action complaint against Dairy Farmers of America. The plaintiff alleged that Dairy Farmers of America attempted to or actually created a monopsony in the market for raw grade A milk in the Northeast, and therefore suppressing competition in violation of antitrust law. And a monopsony is a market in which there is only one buyer for a product. And based on publicly available data, plaintiff pointed out a divergence in 2020 between DFA's average sales price and the average price DFA paid to its members. And in addition, plaintiffs alleged that DFA reduced competing dairy farms and cooperatives' access to raw milk processors, thus reducing the number of potential buyers for raw grade A milk in the Northeast region. So the putative class in this case includes any dairy farmers who produced and sold raw grade A milk within the northeastern United States anytime from May 10, 2016 to the present. And DFA's northeast area includes Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and most of Pennsylvania. All right, so that is it for this past quarter's legal developments, and I will now hand it over to you, Brook.
Okay, thank you very much, Chloe. It's interesting to note again that in that final development, the region that they're using is actually a DFA region, not a federal milk marketing order region. So they're using a system that perhaps isn't the best choice, but it was what the plaintiff's counsel preferred anyway. Okay, now what I'm going to talk about is dairy programs and the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill. And I'm going to sort of stick to programs that were creatures of the Farm Bill to begin with. Now, we all know from the last Farm Bill that perhaps sticking to the Farm Bill, sticking to programs that were the creatures of the Farm Bill and not going into other areas or amending other statutes or other programs that aren't necessarily Farm Bill programs, i.e. the federal milk marketing order system, can produce some unfortunate results, perhaps. And we've lived through the results or the outcome of one of those attempts to sort of go beyond what is traditional Farm Bill subject matter and tweak something else. So I'm going to try to stick to the things that are traditional Farm Bill Title I type dairy programs. So that's what we're going to stick to, but you will see that I'm going to talk about some of the other things too. All right. Now, what I want to disclose right out of the box here is that much of what I'm going to cover was already set forth in one form or another in this article that was written by Daniel Munch, who is a American Farm Bureau Federation economist, in the September 27, 2022 American Farm Bureau Federation Market Intel column. And it was called Overview of Dairy Programs in the Farm Bill. And not only am I sort of sticking to the subject matter that's set forth in there, because it's a nice, handy way to divide between programs and to just concentrate on the things that are sort of Farm Bill dairy programs, but also some of the conceptualization of it and the way things are communicated in there is so good that there's no point to reinvent the wheel. So if you see a similarity, it's because that similarity is clearly admitted. And this is just an excellent, excellent article. I always find these market intel things from American Farm Bureau to be just universally always good. And they have great graphics too. Okay, so the Farm Bill. The 2018 Farm Bill was called the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, and there's a link to it. Is set to expire on September 30 of 2023. There have been 18 farm bills since the 30s, all with, as we know, various names and various incarnations, and not always on a precise schedule of 5 years, but that's the aspiration, and try to stick to that so that we have this date here that carries with it a lot of consequences. But before we get to that, let's just go over real quickly. The structure of the Farm Bill, of course, is in the various titles. And I have a slide that I will go over the various titles in a minute. But here is a close-up of the table of contents of Title I. And Title I is where the majority of what we're going to talk about here appears. The majority of what we're going to talk about, I'll put it that way, not everything we're going to talk about. But if you look at the 2018 Farm Bill, you can see down here under Subtitle D, Dairy Margin Coverage and Other Dairy-Related Provisions, that here are all of the key things that any of us who have lived through the last 4 years in dairy will understand, which is the DMC, Dairy Margin Coverage Program, got its own section, and that replaces what was called the Margin Protection Program, 1401. We have 1402, which just reauthorizes various things, which we're looking for again in the new Farm Bill. And then, of course, the infamous Section 1403, which amended the Class 1 skim milk price under the Federal Milk Marketing Order system, and in fact, caused all the chaos that ensued in the 2020-2021 timeframe. Of course, it had some help in causing that chaos by a lot of the market disruptions that were related to COVID, and then the attempts to address those market disruptions from COVID with cheese purchasing by the state, which of course skewed the prices of cheese as the Federal Milk Marketing Order system, computes them. And then, of course, led to all sorts of depooling of milk. There's the 1403 is sort of the offending section where in 2018, Congress went beyond the usual and customary scope of the Farm Bill to tweak something else that may not have been the best decision, but of course, we've all lived through it, and I will discuss it a little bit later. And then there is this new program, or a rechristening and changing of a program that got its own section called 1404, the Dairy Product Donation. That when you sit there and you open the 2018 Farm Bill, it's not hard to read all of those sections and see all of that. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, now, how does the Farm Bill work? Well, the Farm Bill works by the same thing that makes all of the intercontinental ballistic missile treaties work, which is the threat of mutually assured destruction, which is if the Farm Bill were to expire without a new Farm Bill in place, or if the programs weren't granted some kind of extension by Congress, then all the programs would default back to their 1949 levels. And so a creative and somewhat ingenious mechanism, perhaps, to some. And so that means reverting to support price programs for the limited number of commodities that were covered back then to a 73-year-old version of those types of programs. And needless to say, that's not something that anyone wants to happen. And in fact, usually or universally, it's understood that that would be disaster. And so, even adjusted for inflation, these support prices from the 1949 Farm Bill and the limited number of commodities that it covered, they are still far above any current levels and above the current market, even with accounting for inflation. And of course, if in fact nothing happens by that date of September 30th of 2023, I think it's the correct date. I just want to go back again and make sure that I get it. Yep. Then there is no nutrition title and there is no SNAP. So there are no food stamps. So that is the equivalent in Farm Bill's world or the congressional world of mutually assured destruction to some. So, you know, it's a sort of an ingenious game of chicken perhaps being played here, that if you don't get this thing done, you're going to rue the consequences of not getting it done. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, always good to check your Congressional Research Service publications for some nice explanatory research. And here's one that just came out on June 28 of 2022. Called Farm Bill Primer, What is the Farm Bill? And again, this little paragraph is just an excerpt from it. I have the authors here because I think these people always deserve to have some accolades and some acknowledgement at the great things that these CRS employees do. This paragraph tells you the same thing I just told you, which is that essentially this specter of mutually assured destruction, if the Farm Bill doesn't get passed, is what essentially forces things to happen every time. Now, there are some parts of the Farm Bill that are customarily dealt with in the Farm Bill that do have permanent authority elsewhere and don't need reauthorization, like crop insurance, for example. So they don't need to be reauthorized in the Farm Bill every 5 years, but that is that does not make up for the programs that would in fact be lost or become essentially completely non-functioning should the deadline not be met. And of course, the concepts of continuing resolutions and extensions and those sorts of things always come into play when the deadline gets near. Now, here, of course, for a novice is the titles of the Farm Bill, and there are 12 titles. The one that we're going to talk about here for the most part is Title I, which has always been, or is historically always the one that gets the most attention, perhaps. It is the source of what used to be known as direct payments, farm subsidy programs, price supports, you name it. There's all kinds of terminology for it, but this Title I has in some sense been the scapegoat for the ills of the Farm Bill, or the ills of Congress generally, perhaps. And has gone through a lot of transformation to be where it is today. Obviously, the other titles are hugely important, and they sometimes become even more important. Obviously, Title IV, the nutrition title, is what keeps the Farm Bill running because, again, as we said, there would be none if they missed the deadline. There is no SNAP. So also, the other titles equally important, just not what we're here to talk about today. Crop insurance title is Title 11 here, and that we will sort of touch on a little bit because there's a little bit of a sort of gray area between some of the dairy programs that fall under Title I and then potentially things that fall under Title 11. All right, the Farm Bill basics. The basics, I'm not going to go over what's on the left here in text, but obviously the basic setup of the Farm Bill in terms of when it is being negotiated always concerns the concept of what is the new baseline cost for the farm bill as proposed each 5 years when there's a renewal. Everyone wants to know how much is this going to cost. And the cost is factored as a product of the 5-year life of the Farm Bill. And so in this particular chart that we have on the right, you see the various commodity titles, or excuse me, we see the various titles of the Farm Bill listed here, commodities obviously being Title I. And then we see what was the cost of the 2018 Farm Bill over its 5-year life. Actually, excuse me, this is a 10-year life. Did I say a 5-year life? I should have said a 10-year life. If it were to stay in place just as enacted, this would be the cost of each of these titles for 10 years. Now, the second column is the cost of those titles in if there was no 2022 Farm Bill, excuse me, 2023 Farm Bill, and the programs in existence at the conclusion of 2023 simply continued on for 10 years as they are. And so you'll notice that there is a difference between these two columns because the net cost of the 5-year 2018 Farm Bill at its conclusion is a bit higher because of variations in various programs and the amount of expenditure that it takes to keep those programs afloat. So some things go up in the 5 years, some things go down. But the idea is to, or I should put it this way, the idea is that in negotiating a new Farm Bill, everybody's looking at the 10-year cost of those provisions if they live out their natural life, and then 5 more years after that. So baseline of May 2022, the right-hand column is where everything starts in the negotiations over the new Farm Bill. And ultimately, when there's some discussion of whatever is the additional cost of the new Farm Bill, it will be additional cost in comparison to the right-hand column here, the baseline as of May 2022. Obviously, the commodity title is big, and this is in the millions. So this is 56 billion in the commodity area. This nutrition title is, in other words, you add 3 zeros on here. This is $1 trillion. So the nutrition title obviously dwarfs everybody. I hope I didn't say those numbers wrong because math is never my strong suit. I just keep remembering add 3 zeros at the end. Okay, so that gives you a little idea of sort of the terms of the argument when you're talking about what does the Farm Bill cost. It's done based on these sort of 10-year projections of cumulative costs. All right, another thing, and this is just another graphic representation of similar info that we just saw, except this is examining the different titles, and then it has this little light bluish green division of what is in fact this is the just the commodity title. Nope. Oh, okay. So the commodity title is the dark blue here. You see nutrition, the $1 trillion is the orange. And then, you see some other miscellaneous costs here, but in comparison, this just gives you a graphic representation of how large the nutrition title ends up being, particularly in comparison to the commodities title, which is one that has taken a lot of heat for the various price supports and direct payments, as that term has come to be known in somewhat of a derogatory usage. Now, here is another representation of the gross cost of the Farm Bill, and this is set forth in annual increments. And this gives you the color coding, tells you, okay, the SNAP program is the red, the blue is the commodity programs, Title I, the gray is the conservation programs, Title II, and then the dark blue is crop insurance. Those are kind of the ones that we're dealing with most frequently, let's just say. And again, that gives you some idea of the respective relationship of each of them to each other as you go forward. And again, you can see that this is the the projected 2022 here is based on if the 2018 were to stay in place, and then it becomes flat essentially as you go forward, because there are no provisions in the 2018 that would vary any of these things this far into the future. So again, our anniversary of this particular farm bill, if it gets done on time, will be 2028. And that's where sort of the flat, figure starts to come in 2026, probably because there is not a whole lot of variation in any of these expenditures going out that far in the 2018 Farm Bill. So now let's look at one more graphic here. This is the one I was looking at before, which is, this is just Title I, the commodity title. This billions dollars here, this is incorrect. I believe the way these are written, that should be millions, not billions. So yes, because otherwise there'd only be, two numbers and then a decimal point if it was billions. This is technically, that's a typo. Sorry, Farm Bureau, but I believe that is definitely a typo. So this tells you, of the Title I programs, you have PLC, which is price loss coverage, and you have ARC. Those are the two things that are the leftovers and the vestiges of what used to be called direct payments, which are essentially commodity payments for simply for the act of growing these different commodities. Again, the things that people call farm subsidies, direct payments, all the other pejorative type of terms that get used sometimes. That's what we have here. Then everything else is lumped into this red portion. Then if you go over to this diagram, you can see that the dairy portion, and this is a little tiny thing called the milk donation program, but the major expenditure is this dairy margin coverage, which isn't all that old. Talk about that in a minute, but that takes up just a fraction of this portion over here, which is everything else that isn't ARC or PLC. So it just gives you, again, sort of a relativity between themselves, or between these various programs, that helps to understand their relative size. Okay, what are going to be the complications for the 2023 Farm Bill? Well, massive expenditures primarily on Title II, the conservation title in the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, are going to greatly impact the overall budget analysis of the 2023 Farm Bill. And what that means essentially is that in these two acts that came in the first year of the current administration, the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, technically the first 18 months, let's just say, of the new administration, they kind of crossed the border and began to appropriate and direct expenditures that are things that were in fact traditionally within the purview of the Farm Bill, such as spending on conservation programs and or slight retooling or tweaking of conservation programs under Title II. So we have a little bit of mission creep between these other two statutes that were just passed, which are kind of what was called infrastructure, or at least big chunks of it were at one time called infrastructure. And particularly the conservation title is where there's going to be a lot of overlap between things. And I'm sure that the budgetary analysis of the 2023 Farm Bill is going to look a lot different than that little chart that we looked at early on in this presentation, because you're going to have lots of asterisks in there for money that was already appropriated prior to the current Farm Bill to particularly Title II programs. So there's going to be a lot of customization to the financial analysis this year because of these large expenditures that just happened that enter areas traditionally reserved for the Farm Bill, let's just say. So we're also going to have environmental stakeholders of a new kind, perhaps, at the table wanting to get their 2 cents in on the Farm Bill. there are always the usual stakeholders that are definitely beyond traditional ag in a lot of ways, who have been granted seats at the table in the Farm Bill negotiations in the last decade or two. But this time around, we're going to have everyone interested in climate change, carbon emissions, and carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas reductions. All of those people are going to be at the table, or wanting to be at the table at least, because of this massive amount of money that was spent on conservation programs already. And then the Farm Bill is another chance to essentially reopen that book, so to speak, or that legislative piece of work, and potentially get in there and tweak some more. So we're going to see a new audience at this table, or a new stakeholder at this table, which is going to be the environmental movement, or the environmental organizations who are very interested in the things that the conservation title has now begun to be, used for, let's just say. And as I say a lot of times, conservation Title II used to be about soil and water conservation and quality, but now it involves essentially increasing carbon sequestration in soil. So that has now become an entirely newly minted conservation topic of discussion. And we're living through the transformation of what is considered conservation subject matter to include carbon content in soil and trapping carbon in soil. Also, other complication in these upcoming negotiations is going to be, well, is this, based on the political atmosphere in Washington, is this going to be the year that SNAP is severed from the Farm Bill, and that big chunk of that big, let's say that, the big threat that if you don't get this done in time, we're losing SNAP, and there's going to be a large outcry, let's say, that if SNAP is severed from the Farm Bill, then the pressure to get the Farm Bill done and the pressure to compromise, et cetera, is going to start to leak away. And so that's always, the question every time is this the time when the momentum to sever SNAP from the Farm Bill, so that pressure to finish the Farm Bill is not there? Is that going to somehow raise its head this time and be successful? All right. Title I programs that have to do with dairy. Number one, as you saw in that little pie chart, is the Dairy Margin Program, the DMC program. This was created in 2018 Farm Bill. It was, in fact, an idea that was generated by, I think, some academics, the exact way it works, and also Farm Bureau. And the DMC basically is this new dairy margin protection. I shouldn't say protection because that gets confused with its predecessor program called the Margin Protection Program, a new dairy margin coverage program that provides risk protection when milk prices are low or average feed costs are very high, and it compensates for reduced margins. So the key to understand one part of this is that it is administered through FSA, not by private insurers the way some other things that might be called coverage are. This is purely a USDA program that has nothing to do with involving private insurers or any type of insurance policy. It's not crop insurance. There's no insurable event. It's purely a benefit program administered by FSA. It's voluntary. You sign up, and then the payments are when the calculated national margin for milk falls below, or for the production of milk, falls below a producer selected desired margin. So the margin is or in this case, the margin is defined as the difference between the average price of feedstuffs, and in this case, as it was written, it was originally a mixture of alfalfa, hay, soybean meal, and the all milk price. So it's basically your margin between, overfeed. So it's your margin or your profit over feed costs. Okay, so your profit over feed costs is handled in this way. There is a catastrophic coverage, which everyone can get by simply enrolling and paying the $500 enrollment fee. There's no additional premium. And if the margin goes under $4 per hundredweight this was the original conception of it. When it was called the Margin Protection Program. Sorry, I didn't clarify that. When it went under for 2 months, then you'd get a payment to achieve at least a $4 margin over your feed costs on 90% of your production history. Okay, fine. So it's covering a lot of your production, but it's requiring you to, or I should say, it's only getting you back to a $4 margin, nothing higher than that. Then you could buy up coverage above a $4 margin in increments of 50 cents up to $8 per hundredweight. And then you could choose to, and then this is when you're buying up higher amounts, you would have to choose a percentage of your production to insure. So maybe you're only going to insure 50% of your production, of your total volume at these levels. Let's say you bought $8 margin coverage, but you're only getting it on 50% of your milk. But you could buy it up to 90% of your milk, but of course that's more expensive. And there was this tier system, which is the first tier was the first 4 million pounds, and then the second tier was anything over 4 million pounds. And I'm not the guy to know exactly how many cows produce about 4 million pounds annually. Somebody might be able to put that in the chat for us here. But in any event, this original conception of margin protection coverage that was floated in the 2014 Farm Bill did not have good sign-up. There was very little of the buy-up coverage purchased, and there was very little in the way of payouts. So in the 2018 Farm Bill, it was changed to the Dairy Margin Coverage Program. So sorry, I had to tell you that first in order to tell you how this works. But essentially at this point, the program is the 2018 version, where you pay the $100 administrative fee. You get a catastrophic coverage for that, which doesn't have any premiums, where you are at least guaranteed $4 per hundredweight margin, and it's on 95% of your production history. So that's a solid but small margin that you get for free, essentially, and it's to entice everybody to become insured. It saves the legislature money in ad hoc, assistance, as well as begins to create an institutionalization that dairy farmers need to buy these kinds of protections. And then there's the buy-up under the DMC program, which is essentially similar to before, except you can now buy up to $9.50 per hundredweight and as your margin, and you again can go down as little as 5% of your production being covered that way, or up to 95%. And there's a little bit of difference between the tier 1 and the tier 2 now, but they've both been changed. The line of demarcation is 5 million pounds annually now. And the real difference is that you can buy higher coverage for your first 5 million pounds of milk, and then it goes back to the 8 as the maximum for the super large, farms. I see that we're doing a poll right now, which is telling me that I'm almost out of time, which is unfortunate. But and the premiums, I'll just keep going here and do what I can. The premiums were adjusted to make the DMC coverage much less expensive. And there's some graphics here that we could talk about. I will skip over those. Take a look at this. This is very interesting. This shows you the participation in the DMC program as of 2022. And, Pennsylvania is just, going gangbusters here in terms of the amount of individual farmers participating. Look at Wisconsin, obviously that's the exception there. Minnesota, similar to Pennsylvania, I don't know exactly what their total number of dairy farms is. Michigan lagging way behind. And Michigan, is traditionally getting numbers similar to Pennsylvania, but they are not participating in DMC as heavily as Pennsylvania is. And if by comparison, you see California out here. So that gives you a little idea as to the who's participating the most. Pennsylvania is right in there as a an adopter, let's say, of the DMC program. Okay, now there are other types of dairy programs in existence, the Dairy Revenue Protection Program and also the Livestock Gross Margin Program that are under Title 11 as crop insurance. And they are not likely to be on the table in the 2023 Farm Bill negotiations. Just wanted to point those out. Now, in 2023 Farm Bill points for negotiation of DMC, what exactly is going to be on the table to be discussed? Well, I think the DMC program is going to undergo some more tweaks, maybe not that many. It's starting to catch fire, so to speak, and starting to become a standard. But the 5 million pound per year threshold, is that really representative of an average dairy farm? That's the question that some would ask. There might be a desire to want to have a better process for determining production history, because right now it's a little bit, it's not real current. And in fact, between the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bill, they had to have some special provisions to try to bring it more current, but there's probably something going to happen there. And then this idea that that it's only a margin over feed costs and nothing else factored in, that you're buying a guarantee for, might be something that starts to change. What about labor? What about fuel? What about equipment costs? And in fact, the feed costs were changed to eliminate all of the other feeds, and now it's based purely, as of the 2018 Farm Bill, on a 100% alfalfa feed mix. All right, now I'm going to skip over these two because these are not technically Farm Bill programs. I have them in here just for comparative terms in case people want to know. All right, now here's the question that everybody probably wants to talk about, which is, what about the other thing that that Congress monkeyed with in the 2018 Farm Bill that caused all this problem, which is the Class 1 price calculation change that happened in 2018? Well, in that we're running low on time, I'm going to just go forward and say we will likely have an entire webinar devoted to this when the time comes and there are more concrete proposals on the table for the problem that created these gigantic negative producer price differentials. I love this little first bullet point because it's about the most succinct way to say what went wrong in 2018, or at least what happened in 2018 and what the results of it were. And we know that because of this little tweaking in 2018, Congress ended up having to enact this Pandemic Market Volatility Assistance Program, or I should say, money was made available and authorized to be used for that. And $350 million was used and in fact paid to make up for essentially for the tweak that was made to the federal milk marketing order system calculations via the 2018 Farm Bill, which again, maybe wasn't the most advisable way to do it. So I'm going to proceed ahead and see if we have any questions before I resume. How about we do that? Do we have any questions, Jackie or Chloe? I'm just looking to see, and I do not see anything in the chat. Is there anything in the Q&A?
Nope, looks like we don't have any
All
questions
right,
in the
I
chat or
will keep
Q&A, so yeah,
going.
you can keep going. You
All
got another
right.
6 minutes.
All right. So I will just, again, I do have to make some headway through this material, and I'm fairly famous for running out of time. But here, of course, is a relatively well-known chart to some that show if, in fact, Congress had let the Class 1 price formula alone in the 2018 Farm Bill and not made the change that it did, the orange line would be the Class 1 price, and it would also show you the blue line, which is what in fact turned out to be after the tweak made by Congress to the class 1 price, the blue line is what in fact we have. So the last few years, of course, everybody wishes they were living under the orange line in this graph, but in fact they were living under the blue line in this graph, and that's why Congress had to appropriate about $350 million. And this sort of shows a graphic representation of the same thing, and right in here is the pandemic market volatility assistance program payments making up the difference, so that the proper, these large increases here where dairy farmers should have been getting a very, very favorable milk price, they were not, and that difference had to be made up by these payments that you see under the PMVAP designation in this particular graph. I don't like to get into all the details of the higher than or the greater of versus the average, because most people's eyes gloss over. For those of you who understand it, great. If you don't, I think the key from this webinar is simply that in 2018, Congress went beyond the normal areas that it would deal with in the Farm Bill. Particularly, they got into the federal milk marketing order system and tweaked the definition in there that probably should have only been done after hearings by a federal milk market administrator, the way everything else is done in that system. And this is the ramifications of what happened. Now, everyone's going to be looking for the Congress to simply reverse what was done in 2018, so that we don't ever live like we did with this, as shown in the blue line here, that we have wonderful salad days that are shown by this orange line that should have happened. And we'll see. I don't know if the solution is in fact just to turn the clock back and go from average of to greater than. Okay, now the reason I'm saving a little bit of time is to go over. There are other Farm Bill programs regarding dairy that are going to be on the table to be either renewed or reauthorized in this upcoming Farm Bill. The first most important, or I shouldn't say most important, the first is the Dairy Forward Pricing Program. For those of you who know, it's an ability to advance contract for the purchase of milk by a processor. It's a way to essentially have an agreed price that is not necessarily the federal order price. And this is in fact going to be expiring on September 30, 2023. I don't know exactly how hard it will be fought to be renewed. I assume it will be fought very strenuously to be renewed. So that's going to be, I should say that there was in fact, the reauthorization that happened in the 2018 Farm Bill there could be forward pricing contracts for milk to be delivered as far in the future as 2026. But I don't think that's going to necessarily eliminate the fact or eliminate the fight over reauthorizing this. Next, there's the Dairy Indemnity Program, which is an interesting program that has to do with indemnifying dairy farmers for income losses related to various residues in their milk. And the PFAS or the PFAS detections and chemical contaminations that are going on now kind of bring this to the surface a bit. It was extended until September 30 of 2023, but it's going to have to be extended some more in the new Farm Bill in order to continue to be around. And presumably that's something that is going to be desired and is going to be on the table for renewal. The Milk Donation Reimbursement Program is a sort of a partner program with what's called the Dairy Donation Program, and both of them need to be renewed in some capacity. They both do have appropriations that came to them, but those appropriations do have a limit. And so I think they're going to both be up for renewal. They are essentially a program where processors can donate either fluid milk or actual milk products, as that term is defined, which means butter and other types of soft dairy products. And they can be reimbursed for various things. On the fluid milk, it is the historical program was the first one, the milk donation reimbursement program, which did not allow the actual fluid milk. You would get a margin payment for if you had used it for something of a higher class than you did. But the bottom line is the milk itself that you use to make the products or that you were donating wasn't going to be reimbursed. In the dairy donation program, now there's a direct reimbursement for the milk that is either being donated, not just a margin on that milk had you processed it into something else. And there's also for making milk, various other types of dairy products, you can get paid for the milk that went into them. So the bottom line is what this is doing is this is negating the tax deductibility of that because you're getting payment for everything involved. There is some degree of payment coming in. So there's a whole way in which this is going to interface with the tax deductibility of dairy donations that always has to be watched by processors. That's a little chart. There's also this thing called the Dairy Business Innovation Initiatives. It was essentially a large grant program, and these organizations listed here received grants for, it was basically a way to come up with innovative and new dairy products and manufacturing processes to make it more economically viable for small processors to make, locally made and manufactured and sold products from locally sourced milk. Bottom line is this program did receive a large cash infusion here from the American Rescue Plan. I think it was 80 million maybe. And so it has already been funded to some degree. Where it comes out in the 2018 Farm Bill, the 2023 Farm Bill is yet to be seen. Presumably it's got enough money to continue. It just needs to be reauthorized from a statutory standpoint. Okay, that's it. I went a little bit over our time. Do we have any other questions there, Jackie? Otherwise, we can go ahead and let everybody go about their days.
Yeah, no questions. I think we are safe to wrap up.
Okay, sorry for going over a bit there, everyone. But again, we didn't go into the entire mess with the federal order reform ideas to address this class one price calculation change. We will do that in a separate webinar in the future when those ideas are well formulated and being closely debated, and we have some realistic possibility that we're talking about terms that might come into being. It's just way too early for that. So all right, thanks everybody for sticking with us. Have a good day.